Torvan had heard the stories about humans his entire life. Every species in the Galactic Coalition had heard them. Tales of creatures from a death world who fought with savage fury and refused to die when they should. Tales of soldiers who kept fighting even when their bodies were broken. Tales that Torvan believed were nothing more than propaganda designed to make a weak species seem important. He stood at the observation deck of the Volanthi, vessel silent witness, and watched the planet below. Kethris 4 was a harsh world of black rock and poisonous air. The Scarth Dominion had turned it into a fortress. 50,000 soldiers waited on the surface, along with defensive walls, gun emplacements, and orbital cannons that could tear a ship apart in seconds. The Coalition had tried to take this world 3 times before. Each attempt had ended in failure and death. "You seem troubled," Commander Aelith said as she walked up beside him. Torvan turned to face his superior. Aelith was old by Volanthi standards. Her scales faded to a dull gray, but her eyes were still sharp. She had served in more conflicts than Torvan could count. "I am not troubled," he replied. "I am confused. The Coalition has assigned only 300 humans to this operation. 300 soldiers against 50,000. This is not a military strategy. This is a political gesture." Aelith did not respond immediately. She simply looked at the planet with an expression Torvan could not read. "Have you ever seen humans fight?" she asked. "I have reviewed the tactical data. Their reflexes are slow compared to the Korathi. Their strength is inferior to the Tullux. Their technology is decades behind the Volanthi standard. I fail to understand why they have such an exaggerated reputation." Tactical data. Aelith made a sound that might have been laughter. "I watched humans fight on Varaxis 7. I have never spoken about what I saw there. I do not think I ever will." Torvan wanted to ask more, but the communication system activated before he could speak. A human voice filled the observation deck. "Coalition Command, this is the Resolute Dawn. We have arrived at the designated coordinates and are preparing for deployment. Colonel Hayes sends his regards and requests updated enemy positions." The voice was casual, almost cheerful. Torvan found it deeply inappropriate given the circumstances. He activated his personal display and accessed the personnel files for the human contingent. Colonel Daniel Hayes was their commanding officer. 47 years old by human measurement. 23 years of military service. Decorated in 12 separate engagements. The colonel's second in command was Lieutenant Commander Laura Mitchell. 34 years old. 15 years of service. Her file contained a note that her younger brother had been killed in a Scarth attack 4 years ago. Torvan expected to find anger or hatred in her recorded interviews. Instead, he found only cold professionalism. She spoke about combat the way a scientist might speak about an experiment. "I would like to observe the human briefing," Torvan said. Aelith nodded. "I thought you might. I have already arranged access to their communication channel." The display shifted to show the interior of the human ship. Torvan saw the Marines gathered in a large room, checking their weapons and equipment. They wore heavy armor suits designed for hostile environments, but they moved in them as if the weight meant nothing. Colonel Hayes stood at the front of the room. He was a large man with gray at his temples and scars on his face that spoke of past battles. When he spoke, his voice was calm and steady. "Listen up. The Coalition has tried to take this rock 3 times. 3 times they failed. Command has decided that maybe it is time to let the professionals handle it." The Marines laughed. It was not nervous laughter. It was the laughter of people who found genuine amusement in the situation. Zone Red is the most heavily defended sector on the planet. The Korathi refused to assault it. The Tullux called it a death trap. Coalition Command has designated it as our primary objective. More laughter. Torvan did not understand what was funny. Intel says we are facing approximately 12,000 enemy soldiers in Zone Red alone. They have armor support, artillery emplacements, and a bunker complex that goes 6 levels underground. A Marine in the front row raised her hand. Torvald checked the identification tag. Private First Class Megan Torres. Sir, that sounds like a fair fight. Are we sure we do not need backup? The room erupted in laughter again. Colonel Hayes smiled. I asked the same thing. Command said they would send reinforcements if we requested them. I told them not to bother. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell stepped forward. She was smaller than many of the other Marines, but something in her posture made her seem larger. Her eyes scanned the room with the focus of a predator. We drop in 30 minutes. Check your gear. Check your squad mates. If you see something wrong, fix it now. There will be no second chances down there. The mood in the room shifted instantly. The laughter stopped. The Marines became focused and silent as they performed final equipment checks with practiced precision. Torvald watched a young Marine help an older one adjust his armor seals. He watched 2 soldiers share ammunition without being asked. He watched a sergeant walk down the line and personally inspect every weapon in her squad. They are not behaving like soldiers about to face impossible odds, he observed. No, Aelith agreed. They are not. What are they behaving like? Aelith took a long time to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. Like hunters who have finally found prey worth hunting. Torvald returned his attention to the display. The Marines were moving toward their drop pods now, their movements efficient and purposeful. There was no fear in their body language. No hesitation. Colonel Hayes was the last to enter his pod. Before he sealed the hatch, he looked directly at the camera that Torvald was watching through. For a moment, it seemed like the human was staring right at him. Then Hayes smiled, gave a casual salute, and disappeared inside. The drop pods launched moments later. Torvald tracked them on his display as they fell toward the planet's surface like a rain of metal. 300 humans against 50,000 Scoreth. Against fortified positions and heavy weapons and soldiers bred for war. He began recording his observations. This would be a minor footnote in military history, he was certain. A small human contingent that tried and failed to take an impossible objective. Their sacrifice would be honored, perhaps, but ultimately forgotten. The first pods hit the ground. The first shots were fired, and Torvald began to understand how wrong he was about everything. The drop pods hit the surface of Kethris 4 in a pattern that Torvald recognized as a standard assault formation. The humans had landed directly in the center of Zone Red, surrounded on all sides by enemy positions. It was, from a tactical standpoint, suicide. Torvald activated multiple observation feeds to track the human advance. The first thing he saw was death. A Scoreth ambush team had been waiting near the landing zone. They opened fire the moment the pod doors opened. 4 humans died in the first 30 seconds. Their bodies fell to the black rock and did not move again. Torvald expected chaos. He expected panic and screaming and a desperate retreat. That was how most species reacted when an ambush killed their soldiers so quickly. The humans did not panic. They did not even speak. Torvald watched as the surviving Marines moved with a coordination that seemed impossible. There were no verbal commands, no officers shouting orders. The humans communicated through hand signals and body movements, flowing around the ambush site like water around a stone. Sergeant Kevin Ortiz led a fire team of 8 soldiers toward a fortified bunker. The Scoreth defenders saw them coming and opened fire. 1 Marine fell. The others did not slow down. They reached the bunker entrance and went inside. Torvald switched to a different feed that showed the interior. What he saw made his scales tighten against his body. The humans were not fighting like soldiers. They were fighting like something else, something older and more savage. They moved through the bunker corridors with terrible efficiency, killing everything they encountered. Their weapons fired in short, controlled bursts. When they ran out of ammunition, they used knives. When they lost their knives, they used their hands. 11 minutes after Sergeant Ortiz entered the bunker, he walked out the other side. His armor was covered in blood that was not his own. Behind him, over 200 Scarth defenders lay dead. "This is not possible," Torvan said quietly. Commander Aelith did not respond. She simply watched. On another feed, Private First Class Megan Torres was pinned behind a rock formation. Enemy fire had torn a hole in her arm, and blood was running down her armor in a steady stream. Torvan expected her to call for medical support. He expected her to retreat to a safe position and wait for extraction. Instead, Torres pulled a medical kit from her belt with her good hand. While enemy rounds struck the rocks around her, she cleaned her wound, applied a chemical seal, and wrapped it in a tight bandage. The entire process took less than 2 minutes. Then she picked up her weapon and resumed firing. "She should be in shock," Torvan observed. "The pain alone should have rendered her unable to fight." "Humans do not process pain the way we do," Aelith said. "Their bodies produce chemicals during combat that allow them to ignore injuries that would disable other species. They call it adrenaline. That is not possible. No biological system can simply ignore damage." "Watch and learn." Torvan watched. And he learned. The human advance was not fast. It was not elegant. But it was relentless. They pushed forward through enemy fire, through ambush, through traps that should have stopped them cold. Every time the Scoreth killed one human, the others fought harder. Colonel Hayes commanded from the front lines. Not from a safe position behind his soldiers, but beside them. Torvan saw him take a round to his shoulder that would have killed a Volanti instantly. Hayes stumbled, regained his footing, and kept moving. He did not even look at the wound. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell led the eastern advance. Her squad had taken heavy casualties, but she pushed them forward with cold determination. Torvan accessed her communication channel and listened. "Contact left. 2 shooters in the tower. Ortiz, take them out. Copy. Cole, I need covering fire on that bunker entrance. Keep their heads down for 30 seconds. On it, ma'am." There was no emotion in her voice. No anger. No fear. She spoke about combat the way a surgeon might speak about an operation. "Cut here. Remove this. Close the wound." The Scoreth commander recognized the threat. Torvan intercepted communications ordering. Reinforcements to Zone Red. Thousands of soldiers were being pulled from other sectors to stop the human. Advance thought this was exactly what the humans wanted. Torvan suddenly understood the strategy. The humans had never intended to take Zone Red through superior firepower. They intended to be so dangerous that the enemy would have no choice but to focus everything on stopping them. 300 humans were drawing the attention of the entire Scarth army. On the observation display, a single Marine found himself surrounded. His squad was dead. His ammunition was gone. A dozen Scoreth soldiers closed in around him. Their weapons raised dot. The Marine drew his combat knife. What happened next would stay with Torvan for the rest of his life. The human did not surrender. He did not beg for mercy. He charged directly at the closest enemy and drove his blade through the gap in the Scoreth armor. The alien fell. The human took his weapon and killed 2 more before they could react. Then they were on him. Claws and blades and the weight of bodies. But the human kept fighting. He killed 7 Scareth soldiers with nothing but a knife and his bare hands before they finally brought him down. And as he fell, with enemies all around him and death certain, he pulled a grenade from his belt. The explosion killed 12 more. Torvald stopped recording his observations. He stopped taking notes. He simply stared at the display in silence as the implications of what he was seeing finally became clear. These creatures were not soldiers. They were not warriors in the way that other species understood the word. They were something far more dangerous. They were predators who had evolved on a world so harsh that death had become just another enemy to fight. And they had learned, over millions of years, that the only way to survive was to be more savage than anything else in the universe. The battle continued. The humans kept advancing, and Torvald kept watching, unable to look away from the horror and the wonder of what 300 humans could do when they decided that something needed to die by the end of the first hour. The Scarth had lost over 3,000 soldiers in zone. Red alone. The humans had lost 47, and they were still moving forward. 12 hours had passed since the humans landed on Kethra's 4. 12 hours of continuous combat without rest, without pause, without mercy. Torvald had not moved from his observation post. He could not. What he was witnessing had consumed his entire attention, pushing aside hunger and exhaustion and everything else that should have mattered. The human battalion had suffered 43% casualties. In any coalition military doctrine, this was the point where a commander ordered retreat. No force could maintain combat effectiveness after losing nearly half its soldiers. The humans did not retreat. They pushed deeper into zone. Red. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell had taken command of the Eastern Advance, after 2 officers senior to her were killed in rapid succession. Torvald watched her move through the battlefield with a focus that seemed almost mechanical. She issued orders, adjusted positions, and directed fire with the precision of a computer. But she was not a computer. She was flesh and blood, and she had been fighting for 12 hours straight. Tavan accessed her personnel file again. He read the details about her brother's death. He expected to see some sign of vengeance in her actions, some indication that she was fighting out of hatred for the enemy who had taken someone she loved. He saw nothing of the sort. Mitchell fought without emotion. Her tactical decisions were cold and logical. When she ordered soldiers to advance into danger, she did so because it was necessary, not because she wanted the enemy to suffer. This disturbed Torvald more than anything else he had witnessed. He understood vengeance. Vengeance was a motivation that existed in every species. But Mitchell was not motivated by vengeance. She was motivated by something else, something that Torvald could not identify. On another display, Corporal Ryan Peters was fighting alone. His squad had been tasked with holding a bridge crossing that connected 2 sectors of the Scarth defensive line. If the enemy retook the bridge, they could reinforce their positions and potentially cut off the human advance. Peters had 3 soldiers under his command when the counterattack began. Within 30 minutes, he had none. They were all dead or too wounded to fight. He held the bridge anyway. Torvald watched as Peters took position behind a barricade made from destroyed vehicles and enemy bodies. The Scarth came at him in waves, and he killed them all. His weapon ran dry, and he picked up another from a fallen enemy. That weapon ran dry, and he found another. The counterattack lasted 90 minutes. Peters did not move from his position. When coalition medics finally reached the bridge, they found Peters still firing. He had been hit 7 times. His armor was failing. Blood was pooling inside his suit. He refused evacuation until every wounded Marine behind him had been extracted first. Peters died on the bridge, still holding his weapon, still facing the enemy. Why? Torvald asked, his voice barely a whisper. Why did he not retreat? He could have survived. His wounds were not immediately fatal. Commander Eleth answered from behind him. Because his squad was behind him. Because the wounded could not move on their own. He chose to die so they could live. That is not rational. One soldier cannot hold a position forever. His death accomplished nothing. His death bought time. 90 minutes of time. 11 soldiers were evacuated during those 90 minutes. 11 soldiers who would have died without his sacrifice. Tovan considered this. The mathematics were clear. One death for 11 lives. It was a favorable exchange from a purely tactical perspective, but it was not tactical for Corporal Peters. He had not calculated the odds and determined that his life was worth less than 11 others. He had simply refused to abandon his people. The Scarth launched a counteroffensive with armored vehicles. Heavy assault transports rolled toward the human positions, their weapons tearing apart cover and cutting down soldiers who could not move fast enough. The humans had no armor support. They had no heavy weapons designed to penetrate armored hulls. By every measure of military capability, they should have been slaughtered. Staff. Sergeant Nicole Reyes had a different opinion. Torvan watched as Reyes gathered a team of 6 soldiers and moved toward a Scarth supply depot that had been captured earlier in the battle. Inside, they found anti-armor weapons that the enemy had been planning to use against coalition forces. Reyes distributed the weapons to her team and led them directly toward the advancing armor column. They destroyed 9 vehicles in 20 minutes. The armored counteroffensive collapsed. When Colonel Hayes contacted Reyes to commend her initiative, she simply responded, "We needed anti-armor capability, sir. I found anti-armor capability. Problem solved." There was no pride in her voice, no satisfaction. She had identified a problem and fixed it. That was all. Torvan intercepted Scarth communications throughout the battle. What he heard was remarkable. The enemy was afraid, not concerned, not cautious, afraid. The Scarth soldiers were bred for war, genetically engineered to be fearless in combat, and they were afraid of creatures half their size, who had been fighting for half a day. One transmission stood out from the others. A Scarth officer was reporting to his superiors, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of someone who had seen something that broke their understanding of the universe. They do not stop. We have killed so many, but they do not stop. They do not break. They do not run. What are these creatures? What are they? Torvan did not have an answer. He was beginning to suspect that no one in the galaxy did. The battle continued. The humans kept fighting. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Torvan started to accept that everything he thought he knew about warfare was wrong. The Scarth had 50,000 soldiers. They had fortifications and heavy weapons and every advantage that military technology could provide. The humans had 300 Marines and a willingness to die for each other. And the humans were winning. 20 hours of continuous combat. Torvan had stopped counting casualties. He had stopped recording tactical observations. He had stopped doing anything except watching the humans fight and trying to understand what he was seeing. The Marines had been awake for more than a standard day. They had been fighting for most of that time. Their bodies should have collapsed hours ago from exhaustion, dehydration, and accumulated damage. They were still fighting. Torvan pulled up medical research on human physiology, searching for an explanation. What he found was disturbing. Humans produce chemicals during stress that allowed their bodies to function far beyond normal limits. Their hearts pumped faster. Their muscles worked harder. Their minds stayed sharp, even when everything in their biology screamed for rest. This state was called the fight-or-flight response. And humans had evolved it on a world where stopping to rest meant being eaten. But there was more. Torvan found research on something humans called pack bonding. It was a psychological phenomenon where humans formed intense emotional connections with other humans, often within hours of meeting them. The research noted something remarkable. Humans fought harder when protecting their pack than when fighting for themselves. A human who might flee from danger to save their own life would stand and die to protect someone they cared about. This was not rational. This was not tactical. This was something older and deeper. Something written into human genetics over millions of years of evolution. And it explained everything Torvan had witnessed. The humans were not fighting for the coalition. They were not fighting to capture territory or achieve military objectives. They were fighting for each other. Private First Class Brandon Cole demonstrated this in the most direct way possible. Cole's squad had been hit hard during an assault on a Scarth defensive position. Most of his team was dead. His closest friend, a Marine named Derek Walsh, had taken a round through the chest and could not walk. The extraction point was 3 kilometers away. Enemy patrols covered every route. Cole picked up Walsh and started walking. Torvan tracked him through satellite imagery as he moved through enemy territory. Cole was carrying over 100 kilograms of weight in his friend and their combined equipment. He should have been slow and loud, easy prey for the Scarth hunting parties that roamed the area. He was not easy prey. 3 times, Cole encountered enemy soldiers. 3 times, he put down his friend, eliminated the threat, and resumed walking. He killed 11 Scarth in 3 separate engagements while carrying a wounded man through hostile terrain. When Cole finally reached the extraction point, the medics were waiting. They took Walsh and rushed him toward the medical shuttle. Walsh died in Cole's arms before they could begin treatment. Torvan expected Cole to break. He expected grief and tears and the collapse that should follow such a loss. He had seen it in other species. The death of a close companion destroyed something inside a person. Cole stood in silence for a long moment. He looked down at his friend's body. Then he looked up at the nearest officer. "I need more ammunition," he said, "and a new squad assignment." He went back to the fight. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell led the final assault on the Scarth Command Center. Her team had 26 soldiers. The command center was defended by over 500. Any tactical analysis would have called this assault impossible. The numbers were simply too uneven. Even humans could not overcome a 20-to-1 disadvantage against a fortified position. Mitchell did not seem to care about tactical analysis. She moved her team into position and briefed them on the assault plan. Torvan listened through the communication channel. "The command center is our objective. If we take it out, the Scarth lose coordination across the entire sector. Their reinforcements will not know where to go. Their defenses will not know where to focus. We cut the head off the snake, and the body dies." A Marine raised a concern. "Ma'am, the numbers are not in our favor." Mitchell looked at him with eyes that held no doubt. "The numbers have never been in our favor. We are still here. They are still dying. Move out." The assault was not a battle. It was something closer to a force of nature. The humans hit the command center with everything they had. They breached the outer walls through sheer ferocity, pushing through defensive fire that would have stopped any other force in the galaxy. They fought in corridors and stairwells and rooms, killing everything that stood between them and their objective. Torvan watched as Mitchell personally led a charge into the main operations room. She killed the Scarth commander with her sidearm, standing over his body as her soldiers secured the remaining areas. The command center fell in under 2 hours. Colonel Hayes addressed his remaining Marines after the assault. He stood in the ruins of the enemy headquarters, wounded and exhausted, but still standing. His voice carried through the communication channel to every human on the planet. "They thought we would break. They thought we would run. They thought that because we bleed and we die, we must be weak." Hayes paused. "They were wrong. We are not here because we do not feel fear. We are here because we feel it, and we fight anyway. We are not here because we cannot die. We are here because there are things worth dying for. He looked at his soldiers. Broken, bleeding, exhausted soldiers who had been fighting for 20 hours without rest. They need to learn what happens when they threaten our people. Let us teach them. The Marines responded with a sound that made Tarvan's scales pull tight against his body. It was not a cheer. It was not a war cry. It was a roar of unified purpose, a sound that spoke of something ancient and terrible waking up. Torvan turned to Commander Aelith. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. "They are not soldiers," he said. "They are something else entirely." Aelith nodded slowly. "Now you understand why the galaxy fears them." "No," Torvan replied. "Now I understand why the galaxy should fear them." There's a difference. On the planet below, the humans began their final push. And the Scorth, for all their numbers and technology and engineered courage, began to break. The battle for Kethris IV ended 3 days after it began. The Scorth Dominion did not simply surrender the planet. They surrendered the entire sector. Word had spread through their communications network about what happened in Zone Red. About 300 humans who landed in the most heavily defended region on the Fully-Man planet and fought their way through 50,000 soldiers without stopping. About creatures who refused to die when they should have, who kept fighting when retreat was the only sane option, who treated death as an inconvenience rather than an ending. The Scorth High Command decided that any war involving humans was a war they did not want to fight. Torvan transported to the planet's surface to observe the aftermath. He needed to see it with his own eyes, not through a display or a camera feed. He needed to understand what had happened here. The destruction was absolute. The landscape of Zone Red had been transformed into a graveyard of broken equipment and fallen soldiers. Scorth bodies lay everywhere, their weapons still clutched in their claws, their faces frozen in expressions of disbelief and terror. And among the destruction, the humans were working, not celebrating, not resting, working. Torvan watched as human medics moved through the battlefield, checking fallen Scorth for signs of life. When they found survivors, they administered medical treatment. The same humans who had killed thousands of enemy soldiers were now working to save the lives of those who remained. He approached the medic, who was treating a Scorth soldier with a severe chest wound. The medic looked up at Torvan briefly, then returned to his work. "This one should survive," the medic said. The wound missed his major organs. Another few hours without treatment would have killed him, though. "You are saving the lives of your enemies," Torvan observed. The medic shrugged. "The fight is over. Right now, this is just a person who needs help. That is all that matters." Lieutenant Commander Mitchell was coordinating relief efforts near the captured command center. She had been wounded during the final assault, her left arm wrapped in bandages and held in a sling, but she showed no signs of slowing down. Tarvan approached her carefully. He had watched this woman lead an assault against impossible odds. He had seen her kill without hesitation or mercy. He was not certain how she would react to a Volanthi analyst walking up to her. Mitchell looked at him with tired eyes. "You are the observer from the Silent Witness." "Torvan, correct?" "Yes. I have been documenting this operation from the beginning." "Good. Someone should." She gestured at the destruction around them. "What did you think?" Torvan considered the question carefully. "I thought I understood warfare. I thought I understood humans. I was wrong about both." Mitchell nodded slowly. "Most people are." "May I ask you a question, Lieutenant Commander?" "Go ahead." Torvan hesitated, then spoke. "Your brother was killed by the Scorth. I expected to see vengeance in your actions. I expected hatred. Instead, I saw only efficiency. How can you show mercy to the species that took someone you loved?" Mitchell, was silent for a long moment. When she finally answered, her voice was soft. My brother would not have wanted me to become a monster. He was a good man. He believed in protecting people, not punishing them. She looked at the Scorth wounded being treated by human medics. The fight is over. Continuing to hate them will not bring my brother back. It will only turn me into something he would not recognize. Torvald did not know how to respond to this. It was, perhaps, the most alien thing he had encountered during the entire operation. Colonel Hayes was being evacuated for surgery. The shrapnel in his shoulder had finally become too dangerous to ignore. Before the medical shuttle took him away, he walked down the line of his surviving soldiers and thanked each one by name. There were 112 survivors out of the original 300. Hayes knew every single one of them. He knew their names, their home regions, their families. He spoke to each soldier as if they were the only person in the universe, offering words of gratitude and respect that seemed to mean more than any medal or commendation could provide. Torvald watched the memorial service that evening. The humans gathered in a clearing near the landing zone. They had constructed temporary markers for their fallen, simple metal stakes driven into the ground with names carved into the surface. 188 names for 188 dead. The service was not what Torvald expected. There was grief, yes, but also something else. Pride, gratitude, a fierce determination to remember those who had fallen. Private First Class. Cole spoke about Derek Walsh, the friend who had died in his arms at the extraction point. Derek was not a hero when I met him, Cole said. He was just a guy from a small town who wanted to see the universe. He complained about the food. He missed his family. He was scared before every mission, same as the rest of us. Cole paused, looking at the marker that bore his friend's name. But when the time came, he did not run. He stood his ground. He fought until he could not fight anymore. That is what being human means. We are not born heroes. We become heroes when we have to be for the people we care about. There was no crying, no dramatic speeches, just quiet acknowledgement of sacrifice and a promise to remember. Torvald returned to the Silent Witness that night and began writing his final report. He had recorded thousands of data points during the battle. He had analyzed tactical decisions, casualty rates, equipment effectiveness, and strategic outcomes. None of it captured what he had actually witnessed. He deleted his tactical assessment and started again. This time, he wrote only one paragraph. Humans do not have a dreaded reputation because they are strong or fast or technologically advanced. They have a dreaded reputation because they will not stop fighting for each other. Not for victory, not for glory, not for territorial resources or political advantage. For each other. They form bonds with their fellow humans that transcend rational self-interest, and they will die to protect those bonds without hesitation. This makes them the most dangerous species in the known galaxy, not because they cannot be killed, but because killing them only makes the survivors fight harder. He submitted the report and then requested reassignment to Human Integration Studies. His superior contacted him within the hour to ask why. Torvald thought about everything he had seen. The impossible courage, the savage efficiency, the mercy that followed the violence, the bonds that held these creatures together even in the face of death. Because if we cannot be their allies, Torvald answered, I fear we will someday be their enemies. And I have seen what happens to their enemies. I do not wish to be among them. The request was approved immediately. Torvald spent the rest of the night watching recordings from the battle. Not for tactical analysis. Not for his report. Simply to remind himself that what he had witnessed was real. 300 humans had taken the battlefield, and now he understood their dreaded reputation.